A massive black void tears open the sky, swallowing absolutely everything in sight. Down below, a cloaked figure just stands there, watching the chaos. The mysterious figure calls out to Yona, but she yells back that there is zero chance of that. Stick with me, you and I are about to watch a completely wild mystery unfold right here in this dark void. His mission is set. Break through the impossible barriers trapping the girl and smash every little demon standing in his path. A single hand reaches right through the darkness. The boy sparks his magic and bam, the scene flashes back exactly 5 years earlier. Jonathan Langheim, the eldest son of a powerful duke, reads books about legendary places he only dreams of visiting someday. Meanwhile, his actual reality was drastically different. The harsh diagnosis came back: excessive magic power. Doctors could not fix it, making every single day a brutal fight against the pain. Books were his only escape. As the future duke, he should be mastering the sword and studying daily to hone his skills. Instead, he could not even leave his bed. He sits at his desk staring at a framed photo of his mom. His dad passed away early, leaving his fragile mother behind to raise him. In his memory, she stands surrounded by blooming flowers, softly calling for Yona. She told him to grow strong and become a great duke. Her hope was literally his entire reason for pushing forward through the pain. Jonathan quietly promises he will absolutely do his best. The next morning finally arrives, and a servant shows up at his room to deliver a special book. He says thanks, but then they drop off a massive pile of books instead. Now watch closely. This exact moment right here is where everything completely changes. He stares at an ancient book, instantly recognizing the strange script from a story he read once. Could this really be actual ancient text? As he looks closer at the weird symbols, he suddenly realizes he can actually read some of them. It explains how to magically control physical objects. Suddenly his eyes go wide as pure shock hits him. Marionette magic. It takes him several exhausting months, but he finally cracks the code and reads it. He discovers that marionette is real ancient magic, and this incredibly old book is actually a secret research guide. See, he tried casting magic spells before, hoping his massive overload of magical energy would finally be useful. But absolutely nothing worked back then, no matter how hard he pushed his own limits. He quickly learns this stuff is not easy to master. It demands a very specific, rare talent. So he reads the research over and over again, building his understanding of ancient magic totally from scratch. Step by step, he completely masters the advanced magic theory. If there is a tiny chance he can use this, he absolutely must try it out. Boom! A feather floats right up. Jonathan totally loses it. Celebrating his marionette magic actually moves physical objects after all. You and I both know exactly what this means, right? He can finally move his own body. We see him practicing non-stop, using magic to control his own limbs until he is literally walking and moving freely around his room. He stands up tall, testing his steps. Zero pain. Absolutely no restrictions holding him back. He has to tell his dad immediately. With this crazy power, he can claim the dukedom and finally fulfill his mother's dying wish. A deep voice calls him in, and Jonathan nervously walks down the long hallway right into his dad's private study. Inside, his dad sits at a desk covered in paperwork, surrounded by heavy bookshelves. He looks up completely shocked to see him standing. He literally asks if this is actually Jonathan standing there. Jonathan nervously says yes. His dad immediately demands to know why he is not in bed. Then, looking coldly right back down at his papers, he tells his son he is interfering and to leave. Jonathan's hopeful smile instantly drops. He quietly apologizes to his dad and slowly turns around, walking away with a completely broken, heavy heart. That harsh rejection really stung him. But Jonathan absolutely refuses to just give up on his incredible new magical training journey. Flash forward 5 years later, a dark-haired young boy is out in the courtyard fiercely practicing his daily sword strikes and movements. Guards watch him closely, whispering that Lord Seagold handles this intense level of training with total ease. Yep, that is Jonathan's younger half-brother. The kid just keeps fiercely swinging right through his daily drills. An older instructor fiercely barks that Seagold is standing in the way, and the boy quickly apologizes for it. He politely thanks the older man for his guidance, but just gets a really annoyed, dismissive grunt back. Seagold is the son of their dad's second wife. Jonathan totally knows that their father has absolutely huge hopes for his future, treating him as a prime candidate for the next duke. A big birthday is approaching fast. Trust me, you will want to see what happens next. Stick with me. The father plans to use the upcoming birthday party as the perfect chance to announce his decision. With royalty attending, Jonathan perfectly realizes what this means. His father is totally announcing Zeke as the next Langheim family head. When Seagull asks if today is his appointment, Jonathan firmly tells him he must go. Later tonight, Jonathan travels the town in his cloak, sprinting across rooftops and dark streets, his fist tightly clenched with heavy tension. Eventually, he reaches a shady building where a mysterious man waits by the door. Jonathan greets Dr. Gunther, but the doctor quickly notices his eyes looking pretty swollen and immediately asks if he is doing all right. Jonathan requests another examination today, calmly explaining his swordsmanship teacher just scolded him a little bit, but he is completely fine now. Gunther Schultz was the Langheim family's exclusive physician. He diagnosed Jonathan with excessive magic and has been treating him super diligently. But the doctor looks super troubled, realizing that according to his diagnosis, Jonathan's broken body really should not be recovering. Suddenly, Jonathan coldly dismisses Dr. Gunther sharply, claiming he has absolutely zero use for incompetent doctors. Dr. Gunther desperately calls after him, pleading that Master Jonathan's body is not fully healed. 3 months pass with Gunther completely broken by guilt, losing all medical passion. Now pay attention here, an unexpected patient suddenly appears at his dusty clinic. Seeing the suffering Jonathan request his help, Gunther's totally lost medical passion instantly starts burning again. Jonathan hands over a money bag and asks if Gunther will continue his treatments. He honestly admits it might not be enough, but it is all his money. Gunther bravely accepts, stating he will do his absolute best despite his limits. Jonathan thanks him. Inside Dr. Gunther's massive study packed with bookshelves, Jonathan sits quietly while the doctor stands before him. Gunther warmly thanks him and asks if Jonathan fully understood those results from his last test. Jonathan confirms he totally did, but before discussing anything, Dr. Gunther says he really wants to ask Jonathan how he actually understands his own unique condition. A delicate teacup sits nearby as they prepare to talk. Jonathan calmly explains his diagnosis is magic overload. Because his magic overflows way past normal limits, the intense energy constantly erodes his tissues and nerves, keeping him from moving his body exactly the way he truly wants. Dr. Gunther begs him to stay strong, frankly admitting Jonathan can still walk, but absolutely zero signs of recovery exist, and he honestly has no clue how Jonathan even manages this much movement. Then the absolute grim truth drops. Lord Jonathan has exactly 1 year left. Later tonight, Jonathan travels through the moonlit town in his heavy cloak, navigating beautiful European streets lined with those classic timber-framed buildings. His quiet journey takes him through various parts of the empty town until he finally reaches his destination, entering a building. Meanwhile, Jonathan's dark bedroom is completely wrecked. The canopy bed is totally surrounded by scattered books, loose papers, and random items carelessly tossed everywhere. Jonathan sits on his bed reading completely alone. Outside, the grand castle tower stands against the dark passing sky. Day turns into evening, then absolute night. Jonathan continues his solitary, quiet existence, just reading in various estate corners. The scene shifts through different quiet moments, showing him totally absorbed in dusty storage rooms, entirely surrounded by huge book stacks. A younger blonde kid appears in these sweet memories too, shown eagerly reading with super expressive looks crossing his face. Jonathan arrives late to dinner, wearing his cloak and carrying his heavy briefcase. You feel it, right? This dining room is freezing. Duke Langheim sits right at the head of the table with his elaborately dressed second wife and her ornate hair alongside young Zeke, while a servant stands nearby. Someone tells Jonathan he is late. He quickly apologizes for keeping them waiting. His strict stepmother coldly reminds Jonathan that tomorrow is Zeke's big birthday party, warning him not to arrive late like today. Someone questions what Jonathan is even wearing, and he quietly points out that his birthday is actually today. But Duke Langheim totally dismisses this, telling Jonathan that as the eldest son, he really needs to be more patient. Jonathan forces a polite smile, saying it is totally fine since nobody has celebrated his birthday in 10 whole years. He continues, knowing full well his father expects absolutely zero from him. Jonathan heartbreakingly calls himself a complete failure and nuisance. Furious, Duke Langheim yells, "That is enough." Jonathan quickly apologizes to his angry father, admitting he is right and saying sorry for causing trouble right before the party. Young Zeke watches with concern as Jonathan announces he will take his leave. Jonathan walks away down the quiet hallway in his heavy cloak. Behind him, a servant formally announces the sudden arrival of Mrs. Herta, son of Siegart. As Jonathan leaves with that distant profile, trust me, you and I are going to absolutely love what comes next. Let's dive right in. Late that night, Jonathan visits Dr. Schultz, catching the visibly worried man picking at his evening meal. Jonathan actually speaks up first. He admits he was incredibly worried because the good doctor skipped his own medicine yesterday. Dr. Schultz flips it around. Why is Jonathan roaming around this late? What went down? With a grateful nod, Jonathan explains everything. Cut to him gripping a teacup in the hallway. He drops a massive bombshell. He is leaving on a grand journey and needs an entire year of pills. The doctor is absolutely stunned. A journey? Is he actually serious? His panic skyrockets. Traveling in this weak condition is basically game over. What on earth is this kid actually thinking? Does Duke Langheim even know a single thing about this? Jonathan calmly admits he just wants to spend his remaining time finally living free. Still, he promises not to push his body too far. When asked about his father again, Jonathan just says no. Honestly, the Duke will not care at all. Both the doctor and his tiny magical pet look deeply troubled. Dr. Schultz softly asks about his next steps. He quickly packs the meds. Ideally, he would customize a new prescription, but these regular pills will just have to do. If the pain spikes, take the powder. Jonathan smiles and thanks him warmly. Now, here is where things get super real. The doctor asks if he is fully cutting ties with the Lang family. Jonathan nods. He is no longer part of that toxic house, just Jonathan now. No more fancy titles required here. Dr. Schultz warmly agrees, gently calling him Jonah. Jonah remembers his bill, but Schultz totally waves it off. He has been paid plenty, and this kid needs cash for the road ahead. Then the kind old man pulls out something special for Jonah's actual birthday. He hands over a beautiful warding amulet. It is just a small comfort, but he hopes it brings the boy some peace. Jonah takes the precious gift, thanking him with overwhelming emotion. Dr. Schultz wraps him in a massive, heartfelt hug. You can literally feel the old man pouring his love into this young hero. The room goes quiet as Jonah finally absorbs this warmth. Seeing them out, Schultz nags him to eat properly and stay warm. Jonah laughs, saying he has heard that 1,000,000 times by now. The doctor whispers Jonah softly while watching the two of them pack. Dr. Schultz stands right at the door, waving and wishing Jonah the absolute best of luck out there. Outside, a lady asks if the coach heads west. Suddenly, Dr. Schultz acts as the driver, cheerfully offering Jonah a free ride since he is heading west too. The bumpy stagecoach departs with Jonah aboard. But listen to this. Jonah had zero clue that Jonah was about to perform miracles, save countless lives, and become a total legend on this wild trip. Several days pass since leaving that gloomy old mansion. Jonah feels incredibly exhausted, realizing just how brutally hard it is becoming to even control his own failing limbs right now. He moves like a broken puppet. The kid seriously wonders if surviving this solo trip is actually possible anymore. Yet despite the pain, Jonah completely steels himself. He has already made his firm final choice. He quickly reminds himself that he only has one single year left anyway. His ultimate goal, to finally witness the legendary land from the Aries Anecdote, that magical book he read every single day while stuck in bed. Suddenly, the driver yells back, saying they are finally almost there. Jonah stares at the breathtaking countryside view. Rolling golden wheat fields, an old windmill, and cozy farm buildings all sitting under a brilliant blue sky. The kid is totally starstruck, blown away by how beautiful this world is. The driver hands over a special tag. Jonah smiles and genuinely thanks him warmly. The merchant says he is crashing at the inn down the street until his important business completely wraps up. Traveling alone is pretty rough. He tells Jonah to bring that tag and find him if he ever runs into any trouble at all. The friendly driver waves a huge goodbye across the town square, shouting his cheerful farewell, while Jonah stands quietly near a shady background tree. But Jonah spots something super interesting nearby. It is a kid wearing strange clothes. Jonah stands alone in the plaza, clutching his bags, dreaming about finding a cozy inn and finally crashing on a real soft bed. Watch closely now, a dark-haired girl stares, wondering what on earth to do next. Come along with me. We're meeting Marguerite, a blonde girl with animal ears. She excitedly tells Hans this kid traveled here totally alone. Someone sighs heavily about her usual meddling. Another servant mutters it is happening again. Marguerite kindly approaches Jonathan, asking if he needs help. He nervously insists he is completely fine. She knows traveling alone is tough for a kid and asks his name. Introducing herself first, Marguerite cheerfully tells Jonathan they should go. Confused by her kindness, Jonathan nervously stammers out a fake name, Jonah. Reaching a massive mansion, Jonathan is totally stunned. Lady Marguerite is actually the local lord's daughter. Telling Jonathan not to be shy, Marguerite humbly mentions another lady in town who is way more refined. Noticing he is covered in dirt from traveling, she gently tells him to go take a bath. Jonathan realizes that tiny lie just made things way too complicated. After washing up, he walks out rocking a fresh sailor-style outfit. Margaret brightly calls him beautiful. Catching his own reflection, Jonathan sees Yona's dark eyes staring right back. Gazing into his eyes, Marguerite smiles. They are like a pitch-black night sky, absolutely beautiful. Jonathan freezes. He has literally never been complimented before. Now watch closely. Dark silhouettes from his past suddenly echo, spitting harsh words about the failed Yona, telling him to behave and stay hidden. Snapping back, Jonathan realizes they just met, but she has already shown him such genuine, pure kindness. He softly thanks her for the bath. Marguerite just smiles, waving it off like it is nothing. Helping troubled children is a noble lady's duty, Jonathan protests, claiming he is 11 and not a kid. Laughing, Marguerite cheerfully points out she actually just turned 12 the other day. Jonathan insists he is taller. Marguerite totally disagrees. He then claims he beats Hans too, making everyone question his silly confidence. The elderly butler observes their cute rivalry, telling them to compare. He notes the young lady is still just slightly taller. Someone playfully asks Jonathan if he accepts this defeat. A massive feast appears: fresh bread, hearty, main dishes, hot soup, and sweet drinks. Margaret tells him to eat up or he will never grow taller. Jonathan blushes and reluctantly agrees. Following a servant's prompt, Jonathan quietly asks why she is being so incredibly nice to a total stranger. Brushing it off, she explains it is no big deal. As a proud noble, bestowing kindness on commoners is just her natural everyday duty. Jonathan accepts this silently. Suddenly, a sharp-looking man enters the hallway, noting the lively mood. He asks about the guest, and Marguerite happily greets her father. Feeling pretty hungry himself, her father curiously asks who this new kid is. "I know what you are thinking, will he be mad?" "Nope." Jonathan introduces himself as Yona, and the father simply smiles at their new guest. He warmly welcomes Yona to the Hunenberg home, sympathetically noting his long, tough journey out here. Asked about his family, Jonathan quietly admits he does not have any parents. They wonder how he survived the capital. He hesitates, but they kindly reassure him he does not have to answer hard questions. Margaret excitedly declares that tomorrow morning she will personally help Yona find his relatives. Her father agrees to help. Getting back to work, he warmly tells the kids to take their time and enjoy the delicious meal. Margaret beams with joy. We see her standing there in an elegant, beautiful dress alongside her servants. The scene shifts. Jonathan sits alone by a bright window, looking totally withdrawn and anxious. They exchange quick glances. Morning arrives, and Jonathan is stressing over this massive, troubling lie. He knows there are absolutely zero relatives to find here. Sighing at the mess, he joins the group walking through the bustling town. Lord Henberg, Margaret, Hans, and Jonathan move together. Jonathan knows searching is totally pointless anyway. He feels guilty dragging Lady Marguerite into his fake trouble. But as they walk, he notices something super weird. The townsfolk are acting hostile toward Lady Marguerite. They are treating her differently, glaring coldly. Suddenly, a wild commotion breaks out as people trip and fall in the streets. Someone shouts Kurt's name. Marguerite demands answers, but then shockingly drops to the dirt herself, profusely apologizing and begging for forgiveness. You and I are both wondering why throw a dangerous rock at a noble. Suddenly, a furious voice yells at them to go home. Let us jump right in. Stick with me here. Marguerite barely finishes speaking before the entire street erupts into absolute chaos. The furious townsfolk shout that they are suffering because of the Lord. They are being squeezed dry, and these poor people cannot survive like this anymore. Lord Hegenberg tells his lady that he will summon the guards immediately. He sincerely apologizes to Yona. Then Marguerite tells everyone they should just head home today. Someone says it is totally fine walking away. Jonathan simply agrees as they finally head back. Later on, back at the massive mansion, Jonathan asks Hans about the chaos, but Lord Hegenberg steps up instead. He casually explains that many folks are unhappy with his management style. He pauses, adding that this drama happens in literally every domain. He turns to Yona and asks for a quick private moment. Jonathan realizes Hans is keeping secrets. Inside the fancy room, he suddenly spots a thick book on domain management sitting right among the elegant furniture. Margaret sits on the plush couch, whispering that she desperately wants to help her father even just a little bit. She promises to answer his earlier question about why the furious townsfolk are acting so incredibly hostile. The reason her father raised taxes 3 months ago. Marguerite explains that this entire domain relies purely on agriculture, mostly poor farmers. Her dad always tried keeping taxes super low to ensure their people lived happy, truly prosperous lives. Now pay attention here. 3 months ago, he randomly doubled the taxes. The people rebelled, but he forced it anyway. She mentions mysterious merchants have been surrounding her father lately, clearly conducting some very shady kind of secret trade. Jonathan immediately reacts to the word merchants, but Marguerite warns him that is not all. Hans points out Jonathan heard Yona yesterday. Marguerite reveals that whenever she questions her dad about the heavy taxes or shady merchants, he stays completely, entirely silent. She thinks it is simply because Jonathan has no clue what is really happening in this dark domain. She wonders why she is acting so kind to him while the commoners constantly blame her poor father. So Jonathan probably felt lonely. Suddenly, an unknown voice calls out to Lady Marguerite. Jonathan asks if she actually trusts the Count. Margaret firmly replies her dad would never intentionally make their people suffer without reason. Still, she admits that might just be her foolish hope as his daughter. But she insists he constantly works to pure exhaustion for his people, literally sacrificing all his sleep just to do his absolute best. She asks Jonathan if her father really seems like a terrible lord to him, proudly declaring how much she truly respects such a hardworking dad. Jonathan quickly says no. To be totally honest, he has zero idea what kind of guy the Count actually is after only briefly meeting him last night. Yet he is sure the Count has secret reasons. He will believe whatever she tells him. Margaret looks down with a soft sigh. Then she breaks down sobbing on the swing, her heavy emotions completely overwhelming and crushing her. Jonathan gently hands over a clean handkerchief, softly begging Marguerite to please stop crying. Margaret insists she is perfectly fine while crying, saying it is humiliating to be comforted by a younger kid like Yona. You feel that too, right? Jonathan looks totally serious and asks if they should investigate together. Margaret gasps with wide, stunned eyes, treating it like a crazy suggestion. Then she nervously asks what he actually means by investigate. Jonathan boldly explains they will uncover the reason for the heavy taxes themselves. Since Hans refuses to talk, they should secretly spy on whoever the Count meets, or quietly ask around town to see if anyone knows the hidden truth. Marguerite asks how they will ever do that. She doubts if that is really enough to crack the case, but Jonathan insists that since Lady Marguerite wants answers about the Count, they must team up and investigate together. Margaret bravely agrees, saying she totally understands. Meanwhile, hidden inside a building, someone orders a lackey to sell as many as possible, completely ignoring the rising prices. Another shaky voice responds with pure hesitation. Outside the doorway, Jonathan and Marguerite hide in the shadows, secretly eavesdropping on the conversation. Jonathan whispers it sounds like a merchant meeting. They might finally discover where those raised taxes are going. But suddenly someone steps out, and Marguerite goes completely wide-eyed in sheer panic when she recognizes the person. Margaret stares at the man leaving the meeting and quickly asks if Jonathan knows him. Jonathan instantly recognizes the shady merchant. Turns out he met this merchant on his first carriage ride into town. The guy said if he ever hit real trouble, he should just bring a special wooden tag to the local inn and beg for help. Marguerite realizes they must follow this lead. Meanwhile, a suspicious Hans suddenly asks where they are headed. Margaret lies about finding relatives, and Jonathan plays along. Trust me, you and I absolutely need to see what happens next. Let's dive in. They stick to their story, keeping their cover flawless. Jonathan vows to protect Lady Marguerite, but Hans insists on joining them too. Margaret insists she is fine. Suddenly, a rider on horseback yells about protecting Lady Marguerite and races away. Marguerite freezes in absolute shock at this sudden exit, while Hans shouts for Yona to follow them. The scene shows an exterior shot of the grand building they are heading toward. Later, Jonathan thinks about how exhausting being suddenly dragged around is. Marguerite cheerfully apologizes, but quickly points out that it was totally Yona's fault. Jonathan looks completely confused at this. A maid appears happily directing them to Lord Ottimer's room to go ahead. Inside, Ottimer warmly greets Jonathan, playfully calling him kid and saying it is wonderful to finally see him. Jonathan mentions he took up his offer to drop by. Otto asks what is going on, promising that if he can help them out, he gladly will. Jonathan hesitates at the doorway, though. Margaret confidently introduces herself as Count Hegenberg's eldest daughter, politely saying it is a true pleasure to make Ottimer's acquaintance. Then she asks if Otto came here for business with the Lord. Ottomer confirms this is correct, yet internally he wonders how the kid even knows about that secret. Realizing the Count's daughter is actually accompanying this child, he introduces himself as a humble merchant. Margaret then asks what mysterious dealings he has with her father, stating she would very much like him to share them. Ottomer hesitates, explaining that despite the young lady's request, he is not sure he should share this private information. Jonathan strongly pleads with him, explaining that Lady Marguerite has her own determined reasons for wanting to know. Watch closely now. He begs Ottomer for help. Ottomer silently examines the documents while Jonathan and Marguerite nervously wait. The merchant reviews the papers carefully, his face growing much more serious with each passing moment. Finally, Ottomer speaks up, claiming he sees the big picture and truly understands their unique circumstances. Margaret reacts with complete shock, asking if her father is actually buying up wheat and grain. Ottomer simply tells her he does not know the reason why. Jonathan wonders if poor crops somewhere caused a sudden food shortage, but quickly points out this territory is a massive breadbasket. He asks why her rich father needs to buy grain. Marguerite strongly insists every year brings a fantastic harvest, and this year's yield remains normal, so that theory cannot be true at all. Ottomer explains he grew suspicious too, and asked how the grain was used, but Lord Hegenberg kept it a total secret. Jonathan wonders aloud if the Count plans to sell everything off at a high price once the market rises. He totally agrees this situation is extremely strange. Margaret thinks deeply, noting the market has settled down, making it super hard to imagine prices soaring wildly anytime in the future. She wonders what her father is planning. Otto warns Lady Marguerite they still lack enough information, gently suggesting they ask the townspeople for more helpful clues as well. Jonathan fully agrees. Marguerite shows an emotional reaction, her bright eyes reflecting deep concern and absolute determination. The scene shifts to the sunny street outside, where Marguerite politely calls out to someone, asking for a quick moment of their time. Out on the street, someone walks away in the background when Marguerite suddenly turns and recognizes the person. "You see that too, right?" Jonathan immediately notices her reaction. That girl was totally from yesterday. Meanwhile, inside a modest home, a blonde kid in merchant clothing stares in utter shock at the painfully small food display on the counter. He asks his mom if this is seriously all their food. His sad mother stands near the doorway with younger children hiding behind her. Then, in another quiet moment, the mother walks down the long hallway while the boy watches. She apologizes sadly, explaining that this is all they have left and money is incredibly tight right now. But despite this heavy situation, they discovered Marguerite remains incredibly cheerful and beautifully energetic. Jonathan looks completely surprised as papers scatter everywhere. The scene transitions, showing the town's European-style buildings beautifully bathed in early morning light. Through the window, the mansion's architecture stands stark against the sky. Lord Hegenberg appears from a dramatic low angle in ornate noble clothing. Marguerite looks downward, genuine concern washing over her beautiful face. Jonathan firmly stands with Marguerite and some young children from the household. Then Marguerite's face shows pure realization as she says Yona's name, declaring she somehow knew it about her father. Jonathan suggests they should bravely ask Lady Marguerite's father, the Count, directly about the true reason behind these heavy taxes. Marguerite looks visibly concerned and gently hesitates. At the table together, she warmly tells Jonathan she is fine and will stay by him. The town spreads out beautifully below in the morning light. Someone suddenly asks what brings them both here together at such an early hour. "That is where we leave it." Jonathan tells the Count he has questions, and they stand together before heading inside. "All right, let us dive right in." Inside the study, Lord Hegenberg sits high above Jonathan and Marguerite. Jonathan hesitates for a quick second before finally asking if something is totally wrong with the domain's harvest this year. Ottomer explains that the Count actually raised taxes. Heavy taxes make life rough for the villagers, though they are not starving or anything like that. It is more like they are being forced to save up against their will. Both Jonathan and Otto show major concern hearing this. Otto continues, saying on his trip from the imperial capital down to this town, he spotted absolutely endless fields of lush, ripe wheat stretching out before him. He tells Jonathan that Lady Marguerite fully understands his explanation too. He notes Jonathan thinks so deeply despite sharing Marguerite's exact age. Meanwhile, Jonathan honestly reflects that he simply cannot believe such a crazy thing happened. Someone explains that Lady Marguerite is studying estate management incredibly hard. Jonathan looks upward. Meanwhile, Marguerite cries emotionally as this surprising explanation just continues. This is because she deeply respects the Count for governing with good policies supporting his people, and she desperately wishes to help the local townsfolk the exact same way. In close-up, Marguerite says Yona's name with deep emotion. Jonathan watches Marguerite emotionally confront her own father. She tells him she cannot believe he would act without a good reason and begs him to please explain everything. She just cannot believe he is imposing such heavy taxes. She deeply wants to share his burdens. Lord Hedgenberg looks thoughtful, quietly admitting he always assumed she was still a child. He pauses briefly, then simply says his own eyes were clouded. Now pay attention here. Lord Henberg explains the root cause of everything was the neighboring Duchy of Auburn. After heavy rains severely damaged crops last year, the price of wheat and grains quickly rose. It was not severe enough to cause food shortages, so they just watched quietly, assuming it would not affect them. But exactly 3 months ago, reports came from southeastern areas in the Duchy of Auburn, detailing exactly what happened when all the floodwaters dried up. Jonathan asks why that matters, and Lord Hedgenberg drops just one chilling word: locusts. Suddenly, Jonathan recalls the details. Margaret's terrified voice echoes in his mind. Locust plague. The panel shows a massive insect swarm completely blotting out the sky. Locusts usually just act alone and are very few in number. But when conditions are right, they multiply explosively, cross entire continents in massive swarms, and devour every single plant in their path. Jonathan remembers that back while still bedridden, he passed the time reading through ancient documents regarding the domain's mysterious past. He found an old record of heavy rain 80 years ago. It described a harsh drought that struck the following year and a small demon appearing during that exact time. Lord Henberg suddenly calls Yona's name, demanding to know who she truly is. Jonathan calmly responds that she is just an ordinary commoner. The three remain in the study together with extreme tension hanging thickly in the air. Then a small carrier pigeon flies right through the window. Jonathan asks if something happened. You saw that too, right? Lord Henberg looks at the held letter, revealing it arrived 3 days ago. The scene shifts to pure devastation. Massive swarms of aggressive locusts have appeared near the border. These pests are devouring absolutely everything in sight, covering fields in a dark wave of destruction. Lord Hedgenberg explains his grim calculation, judging by the distance from the report to the border. The locust swarm will very likely hit Henberg within a single week. He pauses, then corrects himself. It might be even sooner. Marguerite calls out to her father in shock, but Lord Henberg insists he fully prepared for this exact situation by purchasing merchant food supplies. They will be fine. He boldly declares the Henberg domain will be saved. Meanwhile, Jonathan remains silent, looking deeply thoughtful. Marguerite speaks up desperately, asking her father what will happen even if their domain gets saved. What about the others? She clearly points out that if Henberg fields get destroyed, tons of people across those lands are going to suffer terribly from massive hunger. Lord Henberg coldly responds that this is the breadbasket, the core region supplying essential food to all the other territories. A servant formally addresses him as his lord, the absolute weight of this situation just hanging heavily in the air. Then Jonathan suddenly speaks up, saying he has a bold request. He genuinely asks Lord Hedgenberg to please take him right to the border where the locusts are coming from. Lord Hedgenberg looks totally surprised and questions this, calling him Yona, demanding to know what they could possibly do there. Jonathan explains that if they leave right now, they might actually arrive before those locusts enter their territory. Lord Hedgenberg objects, saying nothing can be done. But trust me on this, Jonathan cuts him off, totally refusing to accept defeat. He insists there are things they can do because he understands a bit about tricky locust behavior. Lord Hedgenberg mentions traditional defense methods. They can suppress the swarm by burning specific fields that the locusts hate. All right, you and I are about to see how they deal with this massive swarm using heavy cannons. Jonathan insists they still have time to make it. He bows incredibly low before Lord Hedgenberg, begging for permission to head out right away. Margaret jumps right in to add her own plea. She desperately begs her father to say yes. Wanting to help the people alongside Yona, she begs to go with them. Lord Hedgenberg stares at the two kids, clearly moved by their incredible determination and spirit. Jonathan and Marguerite stand firmly together, completely united in their shared purpose. Lord Hedgenberg finally agrees, ordering them to leave immediately. The scene shifts to their extremely fast and urgent departure. Horses gallop furiously as voices shout to hurry. 2 days later, a massive caravan of mounted soldiers loaded carriages and supplies races desperately toward the border. Time is absolutely running out. Margaret worries if they will make it in time, and Jonathan assures her he is fine. Looking up, he explains that night is falling fast, and since the locusts are diurnal, they will not show up again until at least tomorrow morning anyway. If those locusts had already invaded their territory, the entire southwestern sky would be totally pitch black. Night falls around their travels as Marguerite clasps her hands warmly, thanking Jonathan for deeply worrying about the local people. She tells him everything is all right while Jonathan just watches her silently. Margaret proudly declares that protecting this land and its people is the absolute duty of the Hegenberg family. She seriously promises to do everything to ensure Yona lives very happily with their relatives from now on. She strongly swears she will. Jonathan stares up at her with totally wide eyes and respectfully calls her Lady Marguerite. But then Jonathan admits it feels awful to be completely left out. Now, standing together in a hallway, Marguerite quickly stammers that she did not mean it like that. Jonathan starts speaking but quietly trails off. Marguerite suddenly lets out a tiny surprised gasp. Jonathan kindly reminds her that since they decided to fight the locusts alongside Lady Marguerite and the Count, he really wants her to rely on him a little bit. Suddenly someone jokes that it is totally fine for the two of them to be so incredibly fired up. Margaret looks confused before bursting into nervous laughter. The massive caravan keeps traveling under darkening skies while their banner whips intensely in the wind. Someone notices the wind direction shifting, and Jonathan immediately realizes this is terrible news. Now pay close attention here. Someone spots a massive black cloud forming. Jonathan intensely stares ahead, identifying it as the dreaded locust swarm. Meanwhile, tense figures can be seen standing watch in the wheat fields. Margaret notices the shifted wind too, realizing the dreaded locusts have already arrived. The ridiculously massive dark swarm looms over those wheat fields like a terrifying living storm. Jonathan explains that the sudden wind change is severely speeding up the locusts, making the scale of this approaching swarm look completely and absolutely enormous. Jonathan commands his forces to fire. Heavy cannons unleash an explosive barrage at the incoming swarm. Massive explosions erupt across the battlefield, but someone realizes something is terribly wrong. The visual perfectly shows the swarm's completely overwhelming scale. It is significantly worse than anyone thought. A soldier loudly yells there are too many, ordering his men to never flinch from those cannons. Another scared voice calls it impossible. The terrified group, including Marguerite, helplessly watches the massive swarm threaten to completely overwhelm their defenses. You and I see Jonathan considering untested, powerful ancient magic. At this current rate, the entire territory will be completely devoured by locusts. He wonders what to do, or if another way exists deeply, knowing that failing now brings completely devastating consequences. The ancient tome appears in his racing thoughts, and memories start beautifully flashing through his mind of the kind people he met, Marguerite's family, and the amazing townsfolk who welcomed him. Jonathan totally steels himself, accepting the hard knowledge that he has no choice but to bet everything. Meanwhile, Marguerite frantically calls out to Yona while Jonathan stands there full of determination, ready to unleash forbidden magic. But Marguerite tells Jonathan everything is fine. He finally begins that ancient incantation, loudly calling out to the primordial wind drifting at the sky's very edge. He intensely commands it to manifest, become a furiously raging spiral vortex, and completely engulf all those little demons. Jonathan perfectly activates the spell with the word storm. Suddenly, a completely massive magical circle forms high above him as he channels ancient magic. Marguerite watches in awe as this epic spell takes shape. The glowing magical formation grows to truly enormous proportions. His spell creates an absolutely massive vortex up high. Down on the ground, amazed soldiers start noticing the locust swarm getting instantly sucked into that vortex. Lord Hegenberg and the others watch as this insane magical tornado pulls every insect toward its center. With all those locusts trapped firmly inside, trust me, you and I are gonna love this epic finale. Jonathan continues his incantation, calling upon deep darkness fire to manifest and unleash its brilliant light. Stick with me. He orders the flames to burn those little devils and dance. Then Jonathan finishes the second spell, shouting for flame. The epic fire magic activates as he channels pure energy right through his hand. The fierce flames erupt with devastating force, igniting every locust trapped in the vortex. An absolute massive pillar of fire shoots into the sky, totally consuming the swarm. Jonathan simply stands there watching the towering inferno he just created. This legendary ancient magic completely burns away the plague threatening their territory. Meanwhile, the smoke and ash from that massive fire spell finally clear, revealing the peaceful town below with its windmill perfectly untouched. Marguerite stands there, taking everything in emotional tears streaming down her face. Meanwhile, Jonathan and the others watch from behind while someone softly mutters that the sight is absolutely beautiful. Jonathan reaches upward right after casting the spell with wild, magical energy still dissipating around him. From way down below, Hans shouts Yona's name while watching him. Marguerite smiles brightly through her tears, completely overwhelmed with emotion at what Jonathan just pulled off. The two of them stand closely together in a vast wheat field, stretching right toward the horizon. Those golden crops are finally safe and untouched beneath the gorgeous clear sky. Meanwhile, joyful soldiers celebrate all across the field. One guy yells he can finally see the bright blue sky, while another loudly shouts those annoying locusts are completely gone. The men are shouting out in pure amazement as they stare up at the perfectly cleared skies. Jonathan and Marguerite slowly walk through the saved wheat together, and she looks down with a beautifully peaceful expression on her face. Now watch closely. Jonathan collapses in the wheat, totally drained from channeling all that insane magic. Marguerite responds softly in the affirmative, gently watching over him as he lies there exhausted in the golden grain. Jonathan collapses completely into the wheat field, absolutely drained from channeling that devastatingly massive fire spell. Marguerite happily calls his name, relieved he is okay. The soldiers and townsfolk swarm around them, cheerfully celebrating right there in the wheat field. Marguerite stares at Jonathan in amazement, asking if he can actually use real magic. She tells him it is incredible how he burned up all those locusts. Jonathan gives an embarrassed little laugh, clearly exhausted but very pleased with himself. Lord Hedgenberg approaches with his soldiers respectfully behind him. He looks at Jonathan and warmly thanks him. He tells him that thanks to him, the entire Hedgenberg domain was saved. Then the proud lord kneels down before the exhausted kids sitting in the field, calling him their little hero. Everyone standing around Jonathan smiles so warmly at him. Hans, Marguerite, her companion creature, and Lord Hedgenberg all look right at him with genuine gratitude and deep affection. Someone gently pats Jonathan's head, and the kid sits there with happy tears in his eyes, quietly thanking them. 3 days later, the town has recovered and life is returning to normal. People are out celebrating and working while carriages move through the busy streets again. Meanwhile, inside the Hedgenberg mansion, daily life resumes. Marguerite and her father continue their work while the loyal staff attend to their duties. Lord Hedgenberg firmly instructs Hans to tell the Utmer company to immediately send the purchased food supplies straight to the disaster area. But then Marguerite and Jonathan enter the office, with Marguerite happily calling out to her father. She earnestly asks him to please allow her to help as well, insisting it is not impossible at all. She excitedly says she is so happy to finally be able to work for the people. Lord Hedgenberg looks at her with mild concern, gently telling her she doesn't need to push herself. Meanwhile, Jonathan stands in the hallway looking so emotional. Behind him, Marguerite and her companion creature wait nearby, while her father can be seen working in the background. "You and I love a huge victory." Marguerite softly tells Jonathan the terrifying locust threat has officially passed and many precious lands have finally been saved. Now Yona can happily live safely at their relative's house. She gently asks Jonathan to stay together with them from now on too. Jonathan quietly listens while looking away, watching the beautiful trees swaying peacefully outside the window. Then Jonathan reflects on his past. For 10 years, he was entirely bedridden, shut away in his room, never experiencing real human kindness. The memory shows him alone, reading at his desk. Then images of his cold family, his stepmother, his father, and himself standing so far apart. The very first person who showed him kindness was Dr. Gunther. Jonathan continues his reflection. After learning his time was limited, he made up his mind and bravely set out on his first journey. The scene shows burned fields and destroyed buildings from the terrifying locust plague. But he smiles, thinking about how the outside world turned out to be so incredibly warm. Images flash through his mind of the people who showed him genuine kindness. Marguerite facing him, Lord Hedgenberg, and Hans, all of them treating him with genuine care. An incredibly warm memory shows Jonathan smiling brightly alongside Marguerite and her companion creature, all three of them happy together. But then the emotional scene shifts to Jonathan lying in bed, reflecting quietly. That is where we leave it. He thinks his time left is only 1 year. Meanwhile, Jonathan sits by the window reading his book. Stick with me here. Looking at the landscape, he still has major goals. Reading books was the only thing keeping his bedridden self going. Now he is absolutely determined to see those legendary places from Ares' stories with his very own eyes. Standing there, Jonathan seriously wonders what might happen if he actually stays. He realizes if he stays and lets Marguerite see him fading away, it would completely break her gentle heart. That thought crushes him. Meanwhile, Marguerite looks so incredibly cheerful down below, completely clueless about his painful internal struggle. Jonathan sits at his desk starting a crucial letter. His pen glides carefully across the paper, composing his deep thoughts with every single deliberate heavy stroke. Life continues totally normally inside the Henberg mansion as a maid carries a tray down the hall. Marguerite looks perfectly content hanging out in the library with her companion creature, while Jonathan keeps busy writing. It feels incredibly peaceful, yet Jonathan stays intensely focused on finishing his mysterious letter. Later on, Margaret leans over that desk with a bright smile, looking right at Jonathan's newly written letter. The paper is completely covered in complex codes, numbers, and secret locations. A fancy candle holder and inkwell sit on the wooden desk. Watch closely. He stares at his letter, knowing exactly what this means. His eyes go wide as the heavy reality of his massive decision hits hard. Then suddenly his frail body just gives out. He collapses, completely overwhelmed by intense pain. Jonathan lies helpless on the floor. His breath comes in desperate, ragged gasps as he fights simply to keep breathing. He desperately stretches his shaking hand toward that medicine bottle, barely out of reach. But his body completely refuses to cooperate, barely able to move at all. His little companion creature watches with deep concern as Jonathan fiercely fights the pain, begging not to fade away, desperately pleading to just keep on traveling the world. Margaret stands deep in thought, calling him Yona. She admits he is a truly strange boy. They searched his relatives' entire house, but nobody could find him anywhere. But get this, that is not the only mystery. From one tiny clue, the kid predicted a massive locust plague. Then, using an insanely huge spell that even a grand mage could not pull off, he completely burned all those locusts away. Suddenly, footsteps echo. A door opens and a servant tells Lord Hedgenberg a new letter has just arrived. Margaret waits in the hallway as Lord Hedgenberg reads it. He instantly reacts in pure shock, demanding to know who that girl is. It turns out the letter holds a marriage proposal for Marguerite. Marguerite excitedly bursts inside, calling for Yona, saying she brought him a special present, but Jonathan is already long gone. The companion creature just sits alone among all the beautifully wrapped presents and fancy decorations scattered around the room. They hold up the letter Jonathan left behind, revealing his emotional farewell message as the heartbreaking sound of crying fills the heavy air. Jonathan slowly walks away from the town, his traveling cloak billowing widely as he looks back at the beautiful landscape one final time. Standing there in his traveling cloak, Jonathan softly says farewell to Lady Marguerite and the Count, wishing them both health and happiness. You and I both feel this, right? The covered wagon rolls through endless fields, carrying him far away from the town and everyone who tried so hard to help. 2 weeks later, Jonathan keeps moving through the thick forest. He confidently tells himself that past this dense forest, they will reach the kingdom of Benita. Walking down the forest path alongside his loyal creature, he says they must keep pushing forward. He realizes the kingdom sits right on the coast, getting super hyped to see the vast ocean for the very first time. But then he suddenly shouts out to someone up ahead. Suddenly, Marguerite grabs Jonathan, demanding to know if he just wants to give up. Both look incredibly shocked. The flashback jumps 11 years into the past. Someone gently tells Lady Mart it is time to rest. At a very somber gathering filled with mourners, Lady Mart holds a precious newborn baby. She is completely surrounded by roses during her absolute final heartbreaking moments. The tragic memory continues, showing Lady Mart's frail health collapsing. Someone points out that childbirth severely weakened her body, noting she was always quite frail and must be extra careful surviving through this brutal winter. Meanwhile, peaceful garden shots reveal the grand estate grounds with people living normally outside. The baby starts crying while Lady Mart holds him close, and someone reaches a protective hand toward them. Then Lady Mart coughs terribly, her sickness visibly worsening. Now in absolute distress, with her dark hair flowing everywhere, she tightly clutches the baby and begs for a miracle. Young Jonathan watches with a worried expression as his mother desperately begs him to please take good care of their precious Yona. Snapping back to present day at the Grand Langheim estate, a furious fist slams down. Duke Langheim furiously demands to know if that fool is still missing, questioning what Jonathan was actually so dissatisfied with. Guards search everywhere for the runaway heir. Trust me, you and I must see what happens next. The Duke continues his frustrated ranting. He points out that when Jonathan was bedridden and sick, he had Gunther, a renowned expert physician from the imperial capital, treat him. Even after completely recovering, Jonathan should have been living comfortably. Still at the Langheim estate, the Duke's stepmother says she raised Jonathan exactly as she swore to Malt she would. Stick with me here. Duke Langheim just sits reflecting, thinking back on how since the day Jonathan was born, he was nothing but absolute trouble. The scene shows a young, worried Jonathan in the past. Then Lady Malt's flower-covered gravestone appears. The Duke admits he still cannot ever forgive Jonathan for losing Malt forever. A young girl stands right in the doorway as he addresses her. The stepmother then tells the Duke to stop worrying about that girl and start thinking about Zeke instead. A curly-haired advisor speaks up, saying that since Zeke is now the official heir, it is absolutely time they considered arranging a proper marriage for him. The stepmother totally agrees, noting that marriage arrangements are crucial for boosting family standing. The advisor asks if she has any solid candidates in mind, mentioning she heard Count Henberg has a lovely daughter around the exact same age as C. Meanwhile, Zeke arrives quickly, asking how Marguerite's condition is doing. He reports they sent messengers and searched the entire domain, but exactly as he expected, they could not trace Yona's whereabouts absolutely anywhere. Dressed up completely elaborately, Marguerite quickly responds that there is zero need for her father to worry whatsoever. Holding up a letter, she notes it is from Duke Langheim. Reading through it, she mentions the contents seem to involve a marriage proposal regarding his second son, Siegbart, who is the next heir. Now, pay attention closely. Lord Henberg checks the letter as Marguerite calls out, telling her father she is truly sorry but absolutely refuses to ever marry anyone. Lord Henberg asks if she will regret saying that. Marguerite firmly responds that of course she will not. But Lord Henberg just smiles, saying he never imagined even Margaret had given up on marrying Yona. He notes that while Yona is merely a commoner, he honestly believed there was absolutely no man more perfectly suitable than Yona. He clearly expresses his deep disappointment. Margaret looks completely shocked and totally flustered, begging her father to hold on and asking what on earth he means. Jonathan just stands casually on the background stairs while Marguerite slowly processes what her father just dropped on her. She looks completely shaken and flustered. Stammering, Marguerite admits she really wants to marry Yona. Lord Henberg asks if she is absolutely sure. Marguerite admits saying such a thing might sound quite strange. Lord Henberg says he understands, then casually notes that this letter is not even necessary anymore. Marguerite quickly adds that she does not care anyway. She never even liked those political noble games anyway. Lord Henberg tells Marguerite that whenever Yona finally returns here someday, she is really going to have to try her best. Meanwhile, Marguerite smiles brightly with her eyes shut tight, confidently declaring that next time she will never let Yona escape. She promises that this time around she will definitely make Yona want to stay forever. Jonathan quietly watches her from the side as she speaks with absolute determination. Let that sink in. The scene shifts to Jonathan traveling down a forest road with Merchant Master Ottomer. The grateful merchant profusely thanks Jonathan, calling him Carlo for saving him. But Jonathan just casually replies that it was extremely lucky he happened to be passing by. Master Ottomer notes that if things stayed as they were, Jonathan would have been brutally attacked and completely wiped out by those forest beasts. He explains his carriage has wards against magical beasts, so safely camping out for a few days will definitely not be a problem. Plus, they will reach Benipia the day after tomorrow. Jonathan just laughs, agreeing. Eventually, the group arrives at a nice forest clearing. Master Otto mentions this spot should be perfectly fine and claims it as their campsite for tonight. They set up camp and build a campfire. Master Otto prepares some food while Jonathan and the large companion creature just quietly watch. Soon enough, the hot meal is completely ready. Master Otto invites them to eat, so Jonathan happily holds up the skewered food and eats enthusiastically. Master Ottomer asks if it tastes good, and Jonathan responds that it is amazing as he continues eating. But suddenly Jonathan's face shows pure shock, his eyes going completely wide. Something totally unexpected happens. Jonathan reacts with massive surprise, looking incredibly startled and confused by whatever just occurred. Master Ottomer curses out loud while fighting off nasty forest beasts alongside Jonathan and the companion creature. There is an entire swarm of them approaching. Jonathan calls to Yona, ordering the creature not to dare leave his side, and Yona clearly confirms understanding. More vicious beasts approach rapidly, causing someone to totally panic. Trust me, you have to see what happens next. As beasts close in, Jonathan hesitates, knowing using ancient magic here means getting caught up in it too. Stick with me here because things get wild. He wonders if there is a way out. Meanwhile, Master Otar rides the massive beast, complaining these monsters will not fill his stomach. Jonathan just replies that he is not into eating them. The battle continues, and Jonathan watches Master Ottimer's incredibly fast sword strikes with pure amazement. He has never seen anyone move so fast. Then Master Otto asks if Carlo is truly just a merchant, demanding to know what he really is. After the fight, Master Otto teases Jonathan, placing his hands on the kid's head. He asks if the terrifying beast scared him completely stiff, or if he was just mesmerized by his incredible strength. He adds that nobody gets good sleep on an empty stomach, telling Jonathan to come on and get back to eating right away. Jonathan enthusiastically agrees and returns to his meal. Throughout the long night, the epic battle continues, with Jonathan and Master Ottimer fighting those magical beasts side by side. Jonathan thinks to himself that he guesses it does not really matter who it is. Morning arrives, sunlight breaking through the forest canopy. Master Otter then tells Yona that they are finally almost out of the deep woods. Jonathan makes a quick sound of acknowledgement. Both Jonathan and Master Ottimer look ahead with pure excitement. Then Jonathan lets out an amazed gasp as they finally step out of the dense forest. Spread out before them is a massive coastal city, its grand architecture stretching all the way down to the shining sea. So Jonathan and Master Ottimer officially arrive at Benicia, the grand capital city of the Benidia Kingdom. The massive coastal city sprawls before them, featuring gorgeous Mediterranean architecture absolutely everywhere. At a stunning noble estate, servants greet them warmly. One of the servants loudly calls out that Prince Carlo is truly wonderful and absolutely amazing. Another servant asks where on earth Jonathan was wandering. Meanwhile, a third excitedly welcomes him home, happily addressing the boy directly as Your Highness. Jonathan just stands there, looking completely uncertain, internally questioning what this whole Your Highness title means. Then a blonde official woman formally welcomes Jonathan into the Grand Kingdom of Benidia. Here is the twist. She officially welcomes the Crown Prince of the Benidia Kingdom. Carlo steps up as a text note clarifies this refers to Regalita Benidia Yona. The massive, ornate royal palace towers before them, boasting elaborate architecture and grand staircases. Jonathan simply stares at the overwhelming sight in complete shock. Inside the opulent palace, someone cheerfully welcomes Prince Carlo back. The blonde official then kindly tells Yona to take it easy and rest from the long travels. She clearly mentions that His Majesty the King is also waiting for them. The official strictly instructs everyone present that Yona is her highly honored guest, so they absolutely must treat her well. Jonathan confirms he completely understands, but suddenly two nearly identical maidservants fiercely compete for the massive honor of serving Yona. Aurora loudly announces she shall attend to Lord Yona, while Priscilla stubbornly insists that she will take care of Lord Yona instead. You and I know this feeling. Jonathan just stands there awkwardly watching this entire mess unfold. One maid gestures for Lady Yona to follow. Meanwhile, Aurora aggressively asks her sister Priscilla if she finished cleaning quickly, reminding her about an important errand for Lord Federico. As they walk through the palace, Yona looks out at the breathtakingly beautiful gardens and architecture. Even up close, it is incredibly beautiful. She reacts with absolute amazement at the stunning scenery. Meanwhile, the energetic maids continue totally fawning over Yona while escorting her through the palace. One warns that Lady Yona is Lord Carlo's guest, so they must be mindful. But another maid gets completely overwhelmed by how pure and adorable Yona is, screaming. She just wants to hold her. Someone mentions that they should have seen something cool leaping out of the water. Then one maid awkwardly clears her throat politely, telling Lady Yona she must be super tired from that long journey. Another informs her a warm bath is prepared. Then a butler announces that after that, Lord Carlo will be joining them for a grand dinner. Inside the royal dining hall, a massive, elaborate feast is laid out on the table. The host with animal ears and horns sits in formal attire with arms outstretched. He welcomes Jonathan, announcing they have been waiting for him. The table is covered with an impressive spread of delicious dishes and delicacies. Jonathan and Carlo sit across from each other at the massive dining table. Jonathan politely addresses him formally as Prince Carlo. But Carlo immediately waves off the formality, telling him to come on, they are friends. There is no need to be so formal and call him your highness here. Carlo asks where Jonathan was coming back from when he arrived, and Jonathan quickly confirms he understands. Carlo mentions it is quite a long story, then quickly shifts the conversation. More importantly, he really wants Jonathan to tell him everything about Yona. We feel that. After the meal, Jonathan holds his stomach, admitting he ate too much. Stick with me here. Carlo suggests a quick stroll, and Jonathan totally agrees. They walk through these stunning, massive palace halls surrounded by grand, epic architecture. Things get serious fast, discussing weapons. Jonathan nervously asks if Carlo is actually planning to mass-produce these incredible items. Carlo just smiles, throwing it right back. Is it even possible? Now watch this part closely. After some deep thought, Carlo openly admits he honestly isn't sure, noting the Empire uses insanely advanced top-tier technology right now. He seriously doubts their own local craftsmen could ever manage to recreate something on this epic level. An advisor suddenly chimes in, pointing out that even if mass production somehow worked, it would take a whole year. But a determined Carlo replies he absolutely cannot wait. They must use whatever is already here. Jonathan is visibly shocked by Carlo. Trust me, things are getting wild.